In March 1909, a U.S. Army survey crew drilling test cores in the Culebra Cut of the Panama Canal broke through bedrock at a depth of 43 feet and hit worked stone, polished basalt, fitted in blocks, forming what the chief engineer's report described as a paved surface of evident artificial construction extending beyond the limits of current excavation. Within 72 hours, the drilling operation had been halted, a restricted perimeter established, and orders issued from Washington to document, extract, and seal. By April 3rd, 7 crates containing skeletal remains measuring between 8 and 11 feet in length were loaded onto the USS Merritt bound for Baltimore. By April 19th, those crates had been signed for by a federal agent and disappeared into an archival void that no FOIA request has penetrated in 115 years. The basalt platforms, the underground chambers, the carved stone map showing 8 other locations across North America. All of it was sealed behind concrete when the canal flooded in 1913. But here's what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers spent the next century making sure you would never ask. What did that map mark? And who is still guarding those other 8 locations? The Panama Canal in 1909 was the largest engineering project in human history. 40,000 workers, 50 million cubic yards of earth moved, malaria, yellow fever, landslides, and political chaos. The men who worked the Culebra Cut were not archaeologists. They were laborers, Americans, Jamaicans, Spanish, Chinese, there to carve a path through the Continental Divide so ships could pass from the Atlantic to the Pacific. They worked 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat. They died from disease, from dynamite accidents, from rock slides. They were paid 10 cents an hour and told to move earth. When they found something in that earth, the priority was not preservation. The priority was staying on schedule. And in March 1909, they found something that made the schedule irrelevant. The chief engineer overseeing the Culebra section was Colonel William Crawford Parsons, age 47, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 16 years of harbor construction, bridge foundations, military fortifications. Parsons was methodical, precise, and kept extensive field notes. Those notes are archived at the Library of Congress. Box 22 contains his daily logs from February through May 1909. The entries for March 14th through March 21st describe the discovery in technical language, measured drawings, and a tone that shifts from routine documentation to something close to alarm. Parsons was not a man given to exaggeration. He described what he saw. And what he saw on March 14th, 1909, at 11:20 in the morning, was the beginning of something he would spend the rest of his career trying to forget. The drill bit punched through at 43 feet. The driller, a man named Samuel Taggart, felt it drop. Not the steady pressure of rock, but a sudden give, like breaking through a shell. He pulled the bit up. The core sample showed limestone and clay down to 42 feet, then a layer of black stone, polished smooth on one face. Taggart showed it to his foreman. The foreman showed it to Parsons. Parsons came to the site within the hour. He looked at the core. He looked at the hole. He ordered a wider excavation. By 3 p.m., they had cleared a section 12 feet square. What they found was a floor. Fitted basalt blocks, each roughly 3 feet by 2 feet, laid edge to edge with joints so tight, Parsons later wrote he could not force a surveyor's pen between them. He ran his hand along the surface. It was smooth, cold, perfect. He ordered the excavation expanded. By March 16th, they had exposed 60 feet by 40 feet of paved surface. It was a platform, rectangular, level. The basalt was volcanic rock, common enough in Panama, but not worked, not fitted, not polished like glass, and buried 43 feet underground. At the platform's center was a raised structure, about 12 feet square, elevated 18 inches above the main pavement. Parsons's crew opened it carefully. Inside was a hollow cavity, 2 feet deep, lined with the same black stone. The cavity contained a single object, a stone slab, 2 feet by 3 feet, 1 inch thick, covered on both faces with carvings. Parsons lifted it out himself. It was heavy. Basalt, like the platform, but lighter in color. One face showed geometric patterns, circles, lines, angles. The other face showed a map. Parsons recognized it immediately. The outline was North America. Distorted, compressed, but unmistakable. The Great Lakes, the Mississippi, the Gulf Coast. Marked on the map were 9 carved depressions, each about an inch across, 8 scattered across the continental interior, the 9th at the bottom of the slab, right where Panama would be. Parsons stared at it for a long time. Then he put it back in the cavity, posted a guard, and sent a telegram to Washington. The orders came back within 48 hours. Continue excavation. Document everything. Extract all portable materials. Prepare the site for sealing. Parsons brought in a restricted crew. 12 men, all Army Corps, all sworn to silence. The excavation continued. The platform they had found was not alone. Buried beside it, under 4 more feet of clay, was a second platform. Then a third. Then a fourth. 4 basalt platforms in a line, running north-south, each separated by 20 feet of undisturbed earth. Each platform had the same construction: fitted pavement, raised central structure, hollow cavity beneath. The cavities in the second, third, and fourth platforms were empty. Whatever had been stored there was long gone. But beneath the platforms was something else. Parsons's crew sank shafts at the platform edges, probing for foundations. 12 feet below the first platform, they broke through into a passage. Not a cave, a tunnel. 8 feet wide, 10 feet high, walls of fitted basalt running perpendicular to the platforms. The crew cleared the tunnel eastward. It ran 200 feet, terminating at a sealed doorway, a single massive slab fitted into a carved frame. No hinges, no lock, just stone on stone, wedged tight. Parsons' men used iron bars to shift it. The door moved 6 inches, stuck, wouldn't go further. The gap was wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Parsons went first. He stood in the doorway and held his lamp high. The chamber was 40 feet long, 30 feet wide, 15 feet to the ceiling. The walls were fitted basalt. The ceiling was a single carved vault. The floor was level, covered in dust. And along both long walls, carved into the stone at waist height, were ledges. Stone shelves. 7 feet long, 3 feet deep, 13 on each wall, 26 total. On each ledge rested a skeleton. Human skeletons, laid out straight, arms at their sides. Every one of them between 8 and 11 feet long. Parsons stood there in the lamplight, in the silence, and counted them twice, because he didn't believe the first count. 26. He walked to the nearest ledge. The bones were intact, darkened with age, no visible damage. He measured the skeleton from skull to heel. 8 feet 4 inches. He measured another. 9 feet 2 inches. He measured a third. 10 feet 9 inches. Next to each skeleton's right hand, positioned on the ledge, was a metal rod. 18 inches long, 1 inch thick, dark gray, smooth. Parsons picked one up. It was cold, heavier than iron, heavier than it had any right to be. He set it back down carefully, like it might break, and walked the length of the chamber, counting ledges, counting bones, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The chamber was sealed. The air was stale but breathable. The temperature was 15 degrees cooler than the excavation above. And carved into the walls, running in horizontal bands 6 feet above the floor, were symbols. Not letters, not pictures. Just marks, repeating in patterns he couldn't read. He went back up to the surface and wrote in his log, "Chamber located beneath first platform. Contents require immediate consultation with Washington." The crew opened the passages under the other 3 platforms. Each led to a similar chamber. The second held 12 skeletons and 12 rods. The third held 9. The fourth held 4. 51 skeletons total. 51 rods. The chambers were identical in construction. The ledges were identical. The skeletons were positioned identically. The only variation was number, decreasing from east to west, as if the chambers had been filled over time, and the fourth was the most recent. Parsons documented every skeleton, every rod, every chamber dimension. He took photographs, glass plate negatives that still exist in his archived papers. The photographs show the chambers, the ledges, the bones. They also show the carved symbols on the walls, encircling each chamber in bands of marks no one could translate. On March 30th, Parsons' staff geologist, Thomas Cray, conducted a material test on one of the rods. Cray was methodical. He tested the rod against everything in the field kit: a steel file, a hardened awl, quartz, granite, a carbide drill tip. Nothing left a mark. He weighed it. 14 pounds for 18 inches, twice what steel would weigh. He tested for magnetism. None. He tested for electrical conductivity. None. He tried to scratch it with a diamond-tipped engraver's point. The diamond left a faint line. That was it. The only thing in the kit that could touch it. Cray wrote at the bottom of his assessment, "Material unknown. Properties inconsistent with any metal in standard reference. Recommend laboratory analysis by qualified metallurgist." The laboratory analysis never happened. On March 31st, Parsons received new orders from Washington. Extract all skeletal remains and metal rods, crate separately, mark as restricted government property, ship via military transport to Baltimore. Do not involve civilian contractors. Prepare site for demolition. The order was signed by the Army Chief of Engineers. No explanation, no questions invited. Parsons complied. The skeletons were wrapped in canvas and placed in wooden shipping crates. 7 crates, each large enough to hold 7 skeletons stacked flat. The rods were crated separately, padded with sawdust. The crates were marked "Geological Specimens, Government Property, Restricted Handling." They were loaded onto wagons, transported to the port at Cologne, and on April 3, 1909, loaded onto the USS Merritt, a military transport running the supply route to Baltimore. The shipping manifest lists them clearly. 7 crates, dimensions recorded, weight recorded. Destination, Baltimore. Receiving agent listed as Special Collections Division, Department of War. The USS Merritt docked in Baltimore on April 19, 1909. A receipt was issued. The crates were signed for. And then they disappeared. The Smithsonian Institution has no record of receiving skeletal remains from Panama in 1909. The Department of War's Special Collections Division has no public archive. AFOIA request filed in 2020 asking for records of the April 1909 shipment returned a response from the National Archives. Records responsive to your request are not located in current holdings. 7 crates. Manifested. Shipped. Signed for by a federal agent. Gone. They went somewhere. Crated materials signed for by the federal government go somewhere. The somewhere is what no one has been able to identify in 115 years of trying. While the crates were being packed, Parsons was ordered to prepare the site for demolition. On April 2nd, explosive charges were set beneath the 3rd and 4th platforms. The platforms were destroyed. The chambers beneath them collapsed into rubble. The 1st and 2nd platforms were left intact, but buried under 20 feet of fill dirt. By April 10th, the site was invisible, indistinguishable from the surrounding excavation. By June, canal construction had resumed over the buried platforms. By 1913, when the canal was flooded, the entire site was under 85 feet of water. The platforms are still there. The chambers under the 1st and 2nd platforms were not destroyed. They were left open, empty, sealed by water and concrete. The ledges where 51 skeletons rested for an unknown span of time are still there, in the dark, under the Culebra Cut, beneath every container ship that passes through the canal on its way from ocean to ocean. But before the demolition, before the burial, Parsons made copies. The stone slab with the map, the one from the cavity under the 1st platform, he documented in his field notebook over 3 days. He measured every mark, traced the continental outline, noted the 9 carved locations. He made a clean copy on a separate sheet and included it in his official report to the Army Chief of Engineers, filed April 15, 1909. The report is referenced in the Corps' annual summary, archived at the National Archives. The report itself is missing. A FOIA request for it in 2019 returned. Records from this period were transferred to the National Archives. Specific documents responsive to your request cannot be located. The National Archives returned the same request with a different answer. Records responsive to your request exist, but are withheld under 5 U.S.C. Section 552, B.1, National Security. National Security. For a report written in 1909 by an Army engineer documenting a stone map found in Panama. That classification has been maintained for 115 years. But Parsons kept his field notebook. It wasn't classified. It was his personal log. After his death in 1924, his papers were donated to the Library of Congress. Box 22 of the William Crawford Parsons papers contains the field notebook from March 1909. The map is there, 3 pages, drawn in ink. The continental outline of North America, distorted but recognizable. 9 marks. Parsons attempted to identify them. He succeeded with 3. The first mark, in the lower Mississippi Valley, he noted as Poverty Point Mounds, Poverty Point, Louisiana, a pre-Columbian earthwork complex dated to 1700 BCE, one of the oldest constructed sites in North America. The second mark, Central Mississippi Valley, he noted as Cahokia Site, Cahokia, Illinois, a city of 10 to 20,000 people around 1100 CE, larger than London at the same time, abandoned by 1350 for reasons no one has satisfactorily explained. The third mark, southern shore of Lake Superior, he noted as copper mines, known sites. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where pre-Columbian peoples extracted 1.5 billion pounds of copper between 5000 BCE and 1200 BCE. That copper has been identified in Bronze Age sites across Europe and the Near East. Someone was shipping North American copper to the Old World during the Bronze Age. Parsons recognized those 3 from Corps of Engineers survey reports and archaeological literature. The other 6 marks he couldn't identify with certainty, but he noted their approximate positions. Appalachian region, possibly West Virginia or Kentucky. Southern shore of Lake Michigan, possibly Chicago area. Great Plains, possibly Nebraska. Pacific Coast, possibly California. Northern Mexico or Southwest, possibly Arizona. Southeastern United States, possibly Georgia or Alabama. 6 marks, 6 unknown locations. Parsons did not speculate on what they indicated. He copied the map, noted the recognizable sites, and sent the report to Washington. The report was classified. The map was buried under national security exemption. But the field notebook stayed in his papers, unnoticed, until researchers started asking the right questions 90 years later. The pattern repeats. The map was not abstract. It was a list. And the locations on that list keep producing the same sequence: discovery, documentation, sealing, silence. The Appalachian mark falls in the region where coal miners, from 1880 to 1920, repeatedly reported finding sealed chambers with skeletal remains of unusual size. The finds follow the same script every time. Crew breaks through, foreman reports it, company sends someone, crew gets paid off, site gets sealed, story disappears. Newspaper archives from West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, dozens of reports. Unusual discovery halts mining operations. Workers transferred after subsurface find. Company cites safety concerns, closes lower shaft. The mark on the map points to the same region. The southern Lake Michigan mark corresponds to the Indiana Dunes. In 2021, a FOIA request to the National Park Service asked for records of any anomalous subsurface discoveries in the Indiana Dunes National Park area. The response. Responsive records exist, but are withheld under 5 U.S.C. Section 552, B.1, National Security. National Security. For a national park. The same exemption used to classify Parsons' 1909 report. The same exemption. applied to a location that appears on a map found under a platform in Panama. The Pacific Coast Mark, Central California, falls near Año Nuevo Point. In 1901, a road construction crew broke into a sea cave and found what the foreman described in his report to the California State Geological Survey as a carved stone chamber with human remains of unusual size. The report exists. California State Archives. The chamber was sealed when construction resumed. The land above that site is now owned by a Delaware-registered LLC called Pacific Coast Holdings, established 2006. No commercial activity. No permits. A gate installed 2013. A camera added 2018. The Great Plains Mark falls in the Nebraska Sandhills. In 1956, a well drilling crew in Cherry County broke into a void at 200 feet. The report to the Nebraska Department of Water Resources describes it as artificially constructed, stone-lined, of undetermined extent. Drilling stopped. Well abandoned. Void not investigated. The report is archived at the Nebraska State Historical Society. The coordinates match the mark on Parsons's map. The southwest mark falls in southern Arizona. In 1897, the Montezuma mine in Yavapai County was sold for 1/3 of market value, sealed, and held for the next 127 years by anonymous corporate entities. Currently, a Delaware LLC. No commercial activity. A surveillance camera on the access road. The mine was sold in 1897. The map was found in 1909. 12 years apart. Same region. Same pattern. 5 of the 8 North American marks have documented discoveries. Sealed chambers. Blocked FOIA requests. Anonymous land holdings. National security classifications. The same pattern, repeated across a century, across a continent. The other 3 marks have not produced public discoveries. Either there is nothing there, or what was found was handled the same way the Culebra skeletons were handled. Crated, shipped, signed for, disappeared. The Smithsonian's role is not incidental. Between 1880 and 1920, the Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology conducted surveys of pre-Columbian sites across the United States. Published results describe standard findings: pottery, tools, earthworks. Newspaper archives from the same period describe Smithsonian representatives arriving at sites where large skeletal remains were found, removing materials, filing reports that didn't match witness accounts. The Smithsonian has no record of most of these removals. What the Smithsonian does have is an 1894 internal protocol on handling non-standard anthropological materials. The protocol uses the phrase documentation with subsequent neutralization. It does not define neutralization. The context is the removal of evidence from the archaeological record. The questions don't resolve. Why classify a 1909 Army Engineers report under national security for 115 years? Why do skeletal remains manifested on a military transport and signed for by a federal agent have no record of arrival? Why do 5 locations on a map found in Panama correspond to sealed sites, blocked records, and corporate land holdings with surveillance? Why hold land in Arizona for 127 years with no commercial use? Why classify National Park Service records under national security? The answers don't fit the standard explanations. This is not coincidence. This is not bureaucratic error. This is pattern. And the pattern has been maintained across more than a century. The map showed 9 locations. 1 was Panama, where the map was found. The other 8 were in North America. The marks were not warnings. They were coordinates. Someone had surveyed this continent, identified 9 sites, built something at each one, and recorded the locations on a stone slab that was sealed under a platform 40 feet underground in Central America. The platforms in Panama are still there, under 85 feet of water in the Culebra Cut. The chambers are still there, empty now, in the dark. The carved symbols on the chamber walls are still there. The basalt pavement is still there. And somewhere, in a restricted facility, in a warehouse with no public access, in an archive that returns FOIA requests with national security exemptions. 7 crates are stored. 51 skeletons, 51 metal rods that resist carbide, conduct no electricity, and weigh twice what steel weighs. Crated in Panama in 1909, shipped to Baltimore, signed for, gone. But the map survives. Parsons's copy is public record. Anyone can request Box 22 from the Library of Congress and see it. 9 marks on a continental outline, carved in stone, copied by an engineer who didn't understand what he'd found, but documented it anyway because that was his job. The marks are there. The coordinates are there. And at 5 of those locations, the same thing has already happened. Someone found something. Someone sealed it. Someone classified the records. Someone is still guarding it. The other 3 locations are waiting, not for discovery, for the question. The question nobody has been willing to ask loudly enough. If the map is real, and if 5 of the marks have already produced sealed sites and disappeared evidence, what is at the other 3? And who decides that a map drawn on stone and buried in Panama in a time before recorded history is a matter of national security in 2024? The thing itself, still existing. Stone platforms under a canal. Empty chambers in the dark. A map copied in ink. And 7 crates, somewhere, holding bones that shouldn't exist and metal that shouldn't be possible, sealed behind a classification that has outlasted every person who signed the original order. Waiting.